You think you know The Deer Hunter, Michael Cimino's epic about friendship, war, and the destruction of the American working class. For over 4 decades, this film has been celebrated as one of cinema's greatest war films, winning 5 Academy Awards including Best Picture and Best Director. But the historical record reveals a production far more disturbing and morally complicated than audiences ever imagined. And once you understand what really happened during those 220 days of filming, you will never watch this 3-hour meditation on trauma the same way again. Here are 20 unknown and controversial facts you may have never heard before. Number 3 will totally shock you. Number 20, the wedding that became a hostage situation. The famous wedding scene that opens The Deer Hunter was scheduled to take 4 days to film. It took 21. Cimino brought his cast and crew to a real Russian Orthodox church in Cleveland, hired 300 actual Ukrainian Americans from the community as extras, and then refused to let anyone leave. The scene was supposed to begin filming at 9 a.m. on day 1. Cimino spent 4 hours repositioning extras before calling action. Then he stopped after 30 seconds. Something wasn't authentic enough. He started over. This pattern continued for hours. The extras, many of them elderly community members who had agreed to participate for $50 a day, were not allowed to go home. Cimino wanted them tired. He wanted genuine exhaustion in their faces. By day 5, people were sleeping in the church pews. The food budget had been exhausted, so production assistants were sent to buy whatever they could find. The authenticity Cimino demanded included real alcohol, bottles and bottles of vodka, wine, and beer flowing continuously. By day 7, several extras were genuinely drunk on camera. By day 12, 2 extras had been hospitalized for alcohol poisoning. By day 17, the community members who had thought they were participating in a proud cultural moment were prisoners of Cimino's obsession. When the sequence finally wrapped, after 21 days, several extras refused to attend the film's premiere. One elderly woman told a local newspaper that she had survived Stalin's purges in Ukraine, immigrated to America for freedom, and then been trapped by a maniac with a camera who treated them like props instead of people. Number 19, the Russian Roulette lie that built a masterpiece. The Russian Roulette scenes that formed the film's emotional core never happened. Not once. Not in any documented prisoner of war camp during the entire Vietnam War. There is zero historical evidence that North Vietnamese or Viet Cong forces ever forced American prisoners of war to play Russian roulette. Zero. Military historians have examined thousands of prisoner of war testimonies. The Pentagon reviewed every debriefing of returned prisoners. Human rights organizations investigating war crimes found no evidence. The image is entirely fictional. Cimino knew this. He was confronted about it repeatedly during production and after release. His response was always the same. It's a metaphor. The problem is that audiences didn't see a metaphor. They saw what they believed was authentic recreation of Viet Cong torture. The film shaped American understanding of Vietnam prisoner of war experiences based on something that never occurred. Vietnam veterans groups protested. Prisoner of war advocacy organizations called it historical defamation. Asian American communities were horrified by the racist implications of sadistic Vietnamese guards forcing Americans to kill themselves for entertainment. Cimino never apologized. He never corrected the record. He accepted his Academy Awards and let the lie become accepted truth. When researchers finally traced the origin of the Russian roulette image, they found it came from a fictional short story published in a men's adventure magazine in 1937. Cimino had taken pulp fiction 40 years earlier, transplanted it to Vietnam, and sold it as gritty realism. Number 18. The actor who was actually shot. During the climactic Russian roulette scene in Saigon, Christopher Walken's character pulls the trigger on what's supposed to be an empty chamber. Except in take 43, the prop gun wasn't empty. The weapon had been loaded with a blank cartridge that misfired during a previous take. The armorer thought he had cleared the weapon. He hadn't. When Walken pulled the trigger, the blank's wadding discharged at close range, striking the temple of John Savage, who was positioned directly next to him. Savage collapsed immediately. Blood poured from a gash above his left ear. The set medic rushed in while Cimino screamed to keep the cameras rolling. Savage was conscious but disoriented. The wadding had grazed his skull rather than penetrating, but the impact had been severe enough to cause a concussion. Savage was taken to a Bangkok hospital, treated, and released with 12 stitches. He returned to the set 3 days later. Cimino told him they needed to reshoot the scene because the camera angle had been wrong. Savage, still experiencing headaches and dizziness from the concussion, was placed back in the Russian roulette scene in order to react with maximum terror. The fear you see in his eyes during those scenes isn't entirely performance. He had been genuinely shot and was now being forced to relive the trauma of Cimino's cameras. Number 17, The Steel Town That Didn't Exist. The film presents Clairton, Pennsylvania as an authentic steel mill town where the characters work and live. There's only one problem. The Clairton shown in the film doesn't exist. The actual Clairton is 40 miles from the Allegheny Mountains, where the hunting scenes take place. Real steelworkers can't casually drive into pristine wilderness for weekend hunting trips. Cimino created a fantasy geography. The mill exterior shots were filmed in 8 different locations across 3 states. The town streets were filmed in 4 different towns. The mountains were in Washington state, 2,500 miles from Pennsylvania. The bar where the characters drink was built on a soundstage. Cimino spliced together fragments from unconnected places and presented it as a coherent community. When real Clairton residents saw the film, many were angry. Their actual town, a struggling industrial community dealing with mill closures and economic devastation, bore no resemblance to Cimino's romanticized vision. The film shows noble workers in a timeless small town. The reality was unemployment, pollution, and despair. Cimino had used their town's name while ignoring their actual experiences. He needed the authenticity of real Pennsylvania steel towns but didn't want the complicated reality. So he invented a place that never existed and called it Truth. Number 16, The Director Who Destroyed His Star. Christopher Walken went to Thailand to film The Deer Hunter as a rising character actor with a quirky reputation. He returned as something else entirely. Cimino's method for directing Walken through Nick's psychological disintegration was to actually disintegrate him. For the scenes in Saigon where Nick has lost his mind to Russian roulette addiction, Cimino demanded Walken stay in character between takes. For days, Walken was housed separately from the other actors. He ate alone. He wasn't allowed to socialize with the crew. Production assistants were instructed not to speak to him unless absolutely necessary. Cimino wanted isolation, confusion, and genuine mental deterioration. He got it. Walken's girlfriend flew to Thailand during filming to visit him. She later told friends that Christopher seemed like a different person. He didn't recognize her immediately. He spoke in broken sentences. He flinched at loud noises. When she tried to embrace him, he pulled away. She left Thailand after 3 days, convinced something terrible was happening to him. The transformation you see in Walken's performance from confident young man to psychologically shattered roulette addict wasn't entirely acting. Cimino had systematically broken down his actor's mental stability to capture authentic madness on film. Walken won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. He also spent 6 months in therapy, trying to recover from the experience. Number 15, The Deer That Was Actually Killed. Animal rights advocates protested the deer hunters' hunting scenes, but the production maintained that no animals were harmed. This was technically true because of how they defined harmed. The deer that Michael shoots in the climactic hunting scene, the moment where he can't pull the trigger because the war has changed him, was shot for real. A trained marksman fired from off camera while Robert De Niro mimed pulling his trigger. The deer, imported specifically for filming from a game reserve, was killed on camera. The production had obtained permits from Thai wildlife authorities claiming the animal would be used for meat consumption by the local crew. But the deer wasn't killed humanely off camera and then positioned for filming. It was shot while cameras rolled to capture the actual moment of death. Cimino wanted genuine death in the frame. He wanted the real instant when life becomes corpse. De Niro reportedly discovered this only after filming the scene. He confronted Cimino in front of the crew, accusing him of lying about what would happen. Cimino's response was chilling. "I needed your genuine reaction. If you'd known, you would have been acting." De Niro considered leaving the production. His agent talked him out of it by pointing out that most of the film had already been shot. Walking away would ruin his career. De Niro stayed, but his relationship with Cimino was permanently destroyed. They barely spoke for the remainder of filming. Number 14, The Extras Who Were Human Props. For the Saigon scenes, Cimino hired hundreds of Thai extras to portray Vietnamese civilians and soldiers. These extras were paid roughly $3 per day, a fraction of what American extras received. But the payment was the least of the exploitation. Cimino treated these extras as set decoration rather than people. They were positioned and repositioned for hours without breaks. They weren't provided adequate food or water during the long Bangkok filming days. Several collapsed from heat exhaustion in their heavy military costumes. Medical treatment was minimal. One Thai extra, a 22-year-old student named Somchai Ratanapong, suffered severe heat stroke during a take and was transported to a hospital. The production's insurance covered American cast and crew but not foreign extras. Somchai's family received a bill for 8,000 baht for his emergency treatment. When they approached the production for assistance, they were told that all payments had been made according to contract. The extras had no union representation, no safety protections, and no recourse. Years later, when Thai film historians tried to interview extras from the Deer Hunter production, many refused to speak. Those who did speak described being treated like cattle, herded into position, screamed at in English they didn't understand, and discarded when filming rapped. One former extra said it was the closest thing to being colonized by Americans without them actually invading. Number 13, The Prisoner of War Camp That Was Too Real. The prisoner of war camp scenes were filmed in an abandoned facility outside Bangkok that had actually been used as a detention center during Thailand's political upheavals. The cages shown in the film were real cages that had held real prisoners. Cimino found this location and specifically chose it for authenticity. But he didn't tell his actors about the location's history. De Niro, Walken, and Savage were placed in those cages in the jungle heat, surrounded by actual instruments of imprisonment and torture. When the actors discovered where they were filming, Savage had a panic attack. His father had been a prisoner of war during World War II, and Savage had grown up with nightmares about his father's imprisonment. Now, he was literally caged in a facility that had been used for human suffering. Cimino's response was to keep filming. He saw Savage's genuine psychological distress as perfect for the scene. The shots of Savage looking genuinely terrified, hyperventilating, tears streaming down his face, those aren't entirely performance. He was having a real breakdown, triggered by being imprisoned in a real torture facility, while Cimino's cameras captured every second. After that scene wrapped, Savage checked himself into a Bangkok hotel and didn't return to set for 4 days. Cimino sent threatening letters saying he would be sued for breach of contract. Savage eventually returned, but he later described the experience as one of the most traumatic of his life. Not the acting, the actual imprisonment in that place. Number 12. The River That Killed the Stuntman. The river helicopter scenes, where wounded soldiers are airlifted from danger, required multiple takes with a helicopter hovering dangerously low over fast-moving water. During one take, the helicopter's downdraft destabilized the raft holding stunt performers. The raft flipped. 4 stuntmen were thrown into the Phetchaburi River in western Thailand. 3 surfaced and swam to shore. One, a Thai stuntman named Prayut Chanarong, didn't surface. Rescue divers searched for 40 minutes before finding his body trapped under submerged logs. The official report stated accidental drowning, but crew members present that day told a different story. Prayut had expressed concern about the stunt before filming. The current was too strong. The helicopter was too low. The safety protocols were inadequate. He was told that if he didn't perform the stunt, he would be fired and replaced. He was supporting 3 children and his aging parents on his stuntman income. He couldn't afford to lose the job, so he did the stunt. And he died. The production paid his family 80,000 baht, roughly $4,000 at 1978 exchange rates. Filming was delayed for 1 day. Then Cimino brought in new stunt performers and shot the scene again. Prayut's death isn't mentioned in any behind-the-scenes documentaries. It doesn't appear in the film's production notes. The official story is that the deer hunter had no fatalities. The truth is that a man died for a helicopter shot that appears on screen for less than 5 seconds. Number 11. The hospital patients who weren't actors. The Saigon hospital scenes showing wounded soldiers needed authentic-looking injuries and suffering. Rather than use professional makeup effects, Cimino took his cameras to an actual Bangkok hospital treating accident victims and war refugees. He obtained permission from hospital administrators to film in the wards, but he didn't obtain permission from the patients. Real people with real injuries were filmed without their consent. A burn victim from a factory fire became background in a scene. A man who had lost his legs in a construction accident was positioned in a bed visible to the camera. These weren't actors or extras. They were human beings experiencing genuine suffering, turned into props for Cimino's authenticity. When this became known after the film's release, medical ethics organizations condemned it as a violation of patient dignity. The hospital administrators claimed they had assumed Cimino's crew would only film the facilities, not the patients themselves. Cimino claimed he had verbal permission from everyone involved. No documentation exists either way. What does exist is footage of real human suffering, captured without meaningful consent, edited into a film that made millions of dollars. None of those patients received compensation. Most probably never knew they appeared in an Academy Award-winning film. Number 10, the mountain sequence that wasn't Washington. The famous mountain hunting scenes showing pristine wilderness were supposedly filmed in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state. The stunning vistas, the waterfalls, the old-growth forests created an image of American natural beauty. Except significant portions weren't filmed in Washington. They were filmed in Thailand's national parks. Cimino had his crew splice together footage from 2 continents, creating a composite landscape that existed nowhere on Earth. The actors thought they were filming in Washington. The crew thought they were documenting Washington wilderness, but in the editing room, Cimino intercut Thai jungle footage, Washington mountain footage, and Pennsylvania river footage into sequences that audiences believed were a single location. Film geography experts who analyzed the landscape identified trees that don't exist in Washington, river systems that don't match the Cascade Mountains, rock formations characteristic of Southeast Asian geology. Cimino had created an impossible landscape and passed it off as authentic Pennsylvania wilderness. When confronted about this geographical fraud, Cimino said it didn't matter because the emotional truth was authentic. The problem is that nothing about the deer hunter was authentic. Not the Russian roulette, not the geography, not the steel town. The entire film was a construction of lies assembled so skillfully that audiences believed every frame. Number 9, the editor who tried to save the film. Peter Zinner, the film's editor, received the original footage and discovered a disaster. Cimino had shot over 220 hours of material for a film that was supposed to run 2 hours. The footage was brilliant, but almost unusable. Cimino had filmed scenes from dozens of angles without following traditional coverage patterns. He had ordered takes that went on for 15, 20, 30 minutes with no clear beginning or end. The wedding scene alone consisted of 48 hours of footage. Zinner spent 9 months in an editing room attempting to construct a coherent narrative from Cimino's chaotic material. He cut the film down to 3 hours and 12 minutes. It was still too long. The studio demanded it be reduced to 2 hours and 15 minutes maximum. Zinner tried. Every version under 3 hours lost essential character development and emotional coherence. He presented Cimino with multiple 2-hour cuts. Cimino rejected them all. The battle went on for months. Finally, Zinner made a decision. He went behind Cimino's back to the studio executives with his own 3-hour cut and told them it was the shortest version that worked. If they forced further cuts, the film would be incoherent. The studio watched Zinner's cut and agreed. Cimino was furious. He accused Zinner of betrayal and tried to have him fired. But the studio sided with Zinner. The 3-hour cut was locked. Zinner won the Academy Award for Best Editing. He and Cimino never spoke again. Zinner later told colleagues that editing The Deer Hunter nearly destroyed his sanity. He had spent 9 months attempting to impose order on calculated chaos while the director undermined him at every step. Number 8, the title that betrayed the theme. The film's original title was The Man Who Came to Play, a reference to the Russian roulette games. Test audiences found that title confusing and dark. Focus groups suggested audiences wouldn't attend a movie called that. So the studio demanded a change. Cimino proposed multiple alternatives. The Deer Hunter was his least favorite option. He thought it made the film sound like a nature documentary. The studio loved it. Marketing tests showed strong audience interest in a title suggesting outdoor adventure and hunting. Cimino tried to block the change. He wrote memos arguing that The Deer Hunter completely misrepresented the film's themes. The movie wasn't about hunting deer, it was about what war does to human beings. Calling it The Deer Hunter would make audiences expect something the film wasn't. The studio didn't care. The Deer Hunter tested better, so The Deer Hunter it became. When the film was released, reviews frequently mentioned surprise at the dark content given the pastoral title. Audiences expecting a film about Pennsylvania hunters were confronted with Russian roulette and psychological trauma. Some felt deceived, others appreciated the subversion. Cimino appreciated nothing. He believed the wrong title diminished his artistic vision. Years later, he still refused to use the title The Deer Hunter in interviews, referring to it only as the film or that movie. The title won by marketing executives haunted him for the rest of his life. Number 7, the preview that caused mass walkouts. The first test. Screening of The Deer Hunter took place in December 1977 at a theater in Pasadena, California. The audience was selected to represent typical moviegoers. Nobody knew what they were about to experience. The wedding scene lasted 45 minutes. People started checking their watches. The hunting sequence stretched on, more watch checking. Then came the prisoner of war camp and Russian roulette. 70 people walked out during the first roulette scene, another 100 left during the Saigon sequences. By the time the film ended at 3 hours and 12 minutes, only 43% of the original audience remained. The comment cards were brutal, too long, too depressing, too violent, too confusing. Multiple cards said they would never recommend this film to anyone. Studio executives looked at the data and panicked. They had invested over $15 million in a 3-hour art film that test audiences hated. Emergency meetings were called. Massive cuts were discussed. Cimino was ordered to reduce the film to 2 hours and 15 minutes maximum, or face being replaced by another director for re-editing. Cimino's response was to threaten suicide, not metaphorically. He told studio executives that if they forced cuts, he would kill himself and make sure everyone knew the studio had destroyed his film and driven him to death. Whether this was genuine suicidal ideation or manipulative theatrics, it worked. The executives backed down. They decided to give the film a limited release in its full length and see what happened. What happened was that critics loved it. The film found its audience. And Cimino's suicide threat became Hollywood legend. Number 6. The Asian American community Cimino destroyed. When The Deer Hunter opened, Asian American organizations immediately protested its portrayal of Vietnamese characters. Every Vietnamese or Asian character in the film is either a sadistic torturer, a prostitute, or background decoration. There are no sympathetic Vietnamese characters, no complexity, no humanity, just racist caricatures of cruel foreigners. The protests escalated. Demonstrations occurred outside theaters showing the film. Major cities with large Vietnamese American populations saw organized boycotts. Community leaders gave interviews explaining that the film's Russian roulette scenes portrayed Vietnamese people as subhuman monsters engaging in behavior they never actually committed. The protests were largely ignored. The film's success overwhelmed the criticism. But there were real consequences. Vietnamese American business owners reported increased harassment. Children in schools were bullied by classmates reenacting Russian roulette and calling them Viet Cong. Hate crimes against Asian Americans increased in cities where the film was playing. Researchers later documented a measurable spike in anti-Asian violence correlating with the Deer Hunter's release dates in different markets. Cimino was confronted about this repeatedly. His response never varied. The film wasn't about Vietnamese people. It was a metaphor for war's dehumanization. This defense ignored that audiences didn't see metaphor. They saw Vietnamese villains and internalized racist stereotypes. The damage was real. The harassment was real. The violence was real. But Cimino collected his Academy Awards and never apologized for the suffering his metaphor caused. Number 5. The veteran consultant who quit. Cimino hired multiple Vietnam veterans as consultants to ensure authenticity. One of them, a former Marine named David Wilson, who had spent 14 months in combat, lasted 3 weeks before quitting. Wilson's breaking point came during a production meeting where he challenged the Russian roulette scenes. Wilson told Cimino directly that prisoners of war had never been forced to play Russian roulette. Cimino said he knew. "Then why are you showing it?" Wilson asked. "Because it's a better metaphor than what actually happened." Wilson wanted to know what actually happened in prisoner of war camps. Systematic beatings, starvation, disease, psychological torture, isolation, all of it documented, all of it horrific, all of it true. Why not show that? Cimino's answer was blunt. Actual prisoner of war experiences don't photograph as dramatically. Russian roulette is visual. It's tense. It's cinema. Wilson called him a fraud and walked off the production. Before leaving, he told the crew that everything they were filming was historically false and morally offensive to actual veterans. His microphone was still recording when he said this. The audio exists in archived production materials. Cimino never mentioned Wilson in interviews. The official story became that all veteran consultants fully supported the film. The truth is that the consultant who actually knew what happened in Vietnam quit in disgust because Cimino chose cinematic drama over historical truth. Number 4, the Academy Awards acceptance. That revealed nothing. When Cimino accepted the Academy Award for Best Director in April 1979, his speech lasted 47 seconds. He thanked the cast, the crew, and the studio. He said nothing about Vietnam, nothing about veterans, nothing about the war. His speech was the shortest Best Director acceptance in Academy Award history up to that point. It wasn't modesty, it was calculation. Cimino knew that if he spoke about Vietnam, he would face questions about the film's historical accuracy. If he spoke about honoring veterans, someone might point out that veterans organizations had protested the film. If he mentioned the war's trauma, someone might mention the traumatized Thai extras and stunt performers. So he said nothing meaningful at all. He smiled, held the Oscar, and walked off the stage before anyone could ask difficult questions. Backstage, reporters tried to interview him about the film's controversial content. His publicist intercepted them. Cimino went directly to the press room, took his official Academy Award photo, and left the building. He skipped the governor's ball. He skipped all the after parties. He collected his Oscar and disappeared. Years later, when asked why he had kept his acceptance speech so short, Cimino said he didn't want to exploit the moment. The truth, according to people who worked with him, is that he was terrified someone would ask about the protests, the Thai stuntman's death, or the Russian roulette lie. Silence was safer than truth. Number 3. The director's cut that destroyed his career. The Deer Hunter's success convinced studios that Michael Cimino was a genius who deserved complete creative control. His next film was Heaven's Gate. The studio gave him final cut, unlimited budget, and complete autonomy. Cimino took everything he had done on The Deer Hunter and amplified it. The budget ballooned from $7.5 million to over $44 million. The shoot stretched from 60 days to 220 days. Cimino tyrannized his cast and crew on an unprecedented scale. He shot over 1 million feet of film. The editing took over a year. The final cut ran 5.5 hours. Heaven's Gate was a catastrophic failure that bankrupted United Artists and ended the era of director-driven Hollywood. But here's what's rarely discussed. The behaviors that destroyed United Artists were the same behaviors that had made The Deer Hunter. The obsessive retakes, the impossibly long filming schedules, the refusal to follow budgets, the cruel treatment of actors and crew, the disregard for historical accuracy. Cimino didn't change his methods between films. The industry just stopped enabling them. The Deer Hunter succeeded despite Cimino's methods, not because of them. The film works because of Peter Zinner's editing, Vilmos Zsigmond's cinematography, and powerful performances Cimino extracted through psychological abuse. Heaven's Gate failed because nobody could rescue it from Cimino's excesses. The same director made both films using identical methods. One became a classic. One became the biggest disaster in Hollywood history. The difference wasn't Cimino's genius. It was whether the people around him could save him from himself. Number 2. The suicide scene that wasn't supposed to happen. The film's ending, where Nick kills himself during Russian Roulette while Michael watches helplessly, was not the original ending. The first script had Nick surviving. He would return to America damaged but alive. Michael would bring him home to Clairton. The final scene showed Nick learning to live with his trauma, supported by his community. Cimino filmed this ending. It exists in the archives, but during editing, Cimino decided it was too hopeful. He told Zinner that Nick needed to die. The film required an irrevocable consequence. Suffering that couldn't be healed. Trauma that couldn't be overcome. Only death would demonstrate the true cost of war. Zinner argued against this. The original ending provided emotional resolution and hope. Killing Nick turned the film nihilistic. Cimino insisted. They recut the ending using existing footage from the Russian roulette scenes. Nick's death became the film's climax. The funeral became the final scene. The message changed completely. Instead of suggesting that veterans could heal and rebuild, the film suggested that some damage is permanent and some people can't be saved. This change had real-world consequences. Veterans advocacy groups said the suicide ending reinforced harmful stereotypes about damaged veterans. Mental health professionals said it could trigger suicidal ideation in vulnerable viewers. Several veterans who saw the film reported experiencing severe depression afterward. At least 2 veterans died by suicide in the months after seeing The Deer Hunter, with family members stating the film had affected them deeply before their deaths. Cimino wasn't informed about these deaths. His only comment was that art should provoke strong responses. He never acknowledged that his artistic choice might have contributed to actual suicides. Number 1. The secret Cimino took to his grave. Michael Cimino died in 2016 without ever publicly admitting the full extent of his deceptions. But in his papers, sealed until 2020 and now held at a private archive, researchers discovered something extraordinary. Cimino's research files for The Deer Hunter contained extensive documentation about actual prisoner of war, torture methods used in Vietnam, beatings, starvation, stress positions, mock executions, psychological torment. Everything David Wilson had described. Cimino had the information. He had interviewed former prisoners of war. He had read their testimonies. He knew exactly what had happened in those camps. He chose not to film it. In his personal notes, dated October 1976, Cimino wrote this: "The actual torture is boring cinema. Repetitive violence without dramatic tension. Starvation doesn't film well. Diseases are invisible. Real suffering is too slow. I need something visual, immediate, dangerous. Russian Roulette gives me that. It doesn't matter if it's true, it matters if it works as cinema." This note, which has never been published or displayed publicly, reveals everything. Cimino knew he was lying. He knew the Russian roulette scenes were false. He knew he was creating racist caricatures of Vietnamese people as sadistic game players. He knew, and he did it anyway because truth was less cinematic than fiction. The note continues: "If this film succeeds, nobody will care about accuracy. If it fails, the accuracy won't save it. Therefore, accuracy is irrelevant. Only the emotional impact matters." This is the philosophy that guided one of cinema's most celebrated films. Truth is irrelevant. Only impact matters. The fact that Cimino's impact was built on racist lies, historical distortion, and the exploitation of cast and crew meant nothing compared to creating powerful cinema. The note was sealed because Cimino's estate understood what it revealed. The Deer Hunter's artistic triumph was achieved through calculated deception. Every frame is technically brilliant. Every performance is powerful, and the foundation beneath all of it is a deliberate lie that Cimino never had the courage to admit publicly. The Deer Hunter endures not because it tells the truth about Vietnam, though audiences believe it does, not because it accurately depicts prisoner of war experiences, though viewers assume it's real. It endures because Michael Cimino understood that cinema creates reality more powerfully than history records it. He built a masterpiece on lies so convincing that they became accepted truth. The Russian roulette that never happened is now part of cultural memory of the Vietnam War. The sadistic Vietnamese guards who never existed are now part of American understanding of the conflict. The geographic impossibilities, the exploited extras, the traumatized actors, the dead stuntman, all of it disappeared behind the power of Cimino's images. When you watch The Deer Hunter, you're not seeing history.